Hello, my name is Jeremy. I'm going to be reading from Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning. I'm going to be rereading from page 122. This will be Adaptations to Aerobic Endurance Training Programs. It is by Anne Swank, PhD. An understanding of responses of body systems to both acute and chronic aerobic exercise is crucial to the strength and conditioning professional for providing effective exercise programs. This chapter describes the acute responses of the cardiovascular and respiratory systems to aerobic exercise and the associated physiological variables used to measure these responses. Also presented are chronic adaptations that occur with aerobic endurance training for each of the body systems and a brief discussions of designing an aerobic exercise program. The chapter concludes with discussions of external factors such as altitude and blood doping that influence responses to aerobic endurance training, as well as the deleterious impact of overtraining and detraining. Acute responses to aerobic exercise. A bout of aerobic exercise places. Hey, look, Cindy, everybody.
Just outside.
I was. I moved
out there.
quickly. Speed. Speed is what I go for. And, yeah. All right. Acute responses to aerobic exercise. A bout of aerobic exercise.
Where's Dave?
Dave went on vacation for a week, I believe.
I'm wondering.
I didn't even know that he was leaving, but he left us.
Oh
But
man!
he'll be back. Monday he should be back, yeah?
I said, at first I thought, well, maybe something happened with the storm, and then I said, nah, it must not be. It must be just away.
Yeah, I think he just planned his vacation that way, I guess, unless something else happens, some emergency. I don't know.
That was very good.
Yeah. Alright, see ya.
Okay.
Bye. Acute responses to aerobic exercise. A bout of aerobic exercise places a significant metabolic demand on the body, especially the cardiovascular and respiratory systems. Repeated exposure to the acute stress of exercise results in many changes in the function and responses of all body systems. Basic knowledge of the acute effects of aerobic exercise provides the foundation for an understanding of the chronic adaptations that are discussed in the next section. Next section. Cardiovascular responses. The primary function of the cardiovascular system during aerobic exercise is to deliver oxygen and other nutrients to the muscles. This section describes the cardiovascular mechanisms of these acute responses. Cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped by the heart in liters per minute and is determined by the quantity of blood ejected with each beat. So it'd be your stroke volume and the heart rate of pumping. So stroke volume times heart rate equals your cardiac output, where Q is the cardiac output. Q equals stroke volume times heart rate. Stroke volume is measured in milliliters of blood per beat. Every time it contracts, and heart rate is measured in beats, contractions per minute. So you keep going like that, but every contraction, stroke volume. And the progression from rest to steady state aerobic exercise, cardiac output initially increases rapidly, then more gradually, and subsequently reaches a plateau. With maximal exercise, cardiac output may increase to 4 times the resting level of about 5 liters per minute to a maximum of 20 to 22 liters per minute. Like that, imagine that. You have a pretty good stroke volume, but you're contracting 150 beats per minute, right? Stroke volume begins to increase at the onset of exercise and continues to rise until the individual's oxygen consumption is at approximately 50% to 60% of maximal oxygen uptake. At that point, stroke volume begins to plateau. College-age men have maximal stroke volumes averaging between 100 and 115 milliliters of blood per beat. Maximal stroke volumes for college-age women are approximately 25% less due to smaller average body size. Stroke volume. 2 physiological mechanisms are responsible for regulation of stroke volume. The first is a result of the end diastolic volume. The volume of blood available to be pumped by the left ventricle at the end of the filling phase goes up and down, or the diastole. The second is due to the action of the catecholamines, including epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are hormones of the sympathetic nervous system that produce a more forceful ventricular contraction and greater systolic emptying of the heart. With aerobic exercise, the amount of blood returning to the heart, also called venous return, coming back through the veins to the blood, is increased, and thus end diastolic volume is significantly increased. There's more blood in there to be pumped up during the diastole. With increased volume, the myocardial fibers become more stretched than at rest, resulting in a more forceful contraction and increase in force of systolic ejection and greater cardiac emptying. This principle is called the Frankstarling Mechanism. It is related to the concept that the force of contraction is a function of the length of the fibers of the muscle wall. This increase in cardiac emptying is characterized by an increase in the ejection fraction, the fraction of the end diastolic volume ejected from the heart. At the onset of exercise, or even with the anticipation of exercise, sympathetic stimulation increases myocardial contractility and consequently increases stroke volume. We'll go a couple more. Heart rate. Time to go. Just prior to and at the beginning of an exercise session, a reflex stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system results in an increase in heart rate. Heart rate increases linear with increases in intensity during aerobic exercise. The rate of increase in heart rate, the actual heart rate response, and the maximal heart rate achieved related to a variety of individual characteristics of the human system, including fitness and age, in addition to exercise workload. Oxygen uptake is the amount of oxygen consumed by the body's tissue. The oxygen demanded of working muscles increases during an acute bout of aerobic exercise and is directly related to the mass of exercising muscle, metabolic efficiency, and exercise intensity. Aerobic exercise involving a large mass of muscle or a greater level of work is likely to be associated with a higher total oxygen uptake. Increased metabolic efficiency allows for an increase in oxygen uptake, especially at maximal exercise. Maximal oxygen uptake is described as the greatest amount of oxygen that can be used at the cellular level for the entire body. It has been found to correlate well with a degree of physical conditioning and is recognized as the most widely accepted measure of cardiorespiratory fitness. The capacity to use oxygen is related primarily to the ability of the heart and circulatory system to transport oxygen and the ability of the body tissues to use it. Resting oxygen uptake is estimated at 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute, which this value is defined as 1 MET, or one metabolic equivalent of task. 1 MET, 3.5 liters of oxygen per kilogram body weight per minute. Maximal oxygen uptake values in normal healthy individual generally range from 25 to 80 milliliters per kilogram per minute, or 7.1 to 22.9 METs, and depend on a variety of physiological parameters including age and conditioning level. Oxygen uptake can be calculated with the Fick equation, which expresses the relationship of cardiac output, oxygen uptake, and RT venous oxygen difference, which is the VO2 will equal, the Q should be the cardiac output times the difference, AVO2 difference, where Q is the cardiac output in milliliters per minute, and AVO2 difference is the arteriovenous oxygen difference. the difference in the oxygen content between in the arteries and in the veins, in milliliters of oxygen per 100 milliliters of blood. Recalling equation 6.1, we can calculate oxygen uptake as shown in the following example. So the VO2 equals the heart rate times the stroke volume times the AVO2 difference, right? And VO2 equals 72 beats per minute times 65 milliliters of blood per beat times 6 milliliters of oxygen divided by blah 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 200 milliliters of oxygen per minute. We'll probably leave it right there. To express oxygen uptake in its common unit, milliliters times kilograms per minute, we would then divide the result by the person's weight in kilograms. For example, an 80 kilogram athlete, 176 pound athlete, the VO2 would be 281 milliliters of oxygen divided by the minutes divided by 80 kilograms. So VO2 would be 3.5 milliliters times kilograms per minute. Good. Gotta go, guys. That ended on page 124. That's page 122 and 124. Cardiovascular responses with cardiac output, stroke volume, heart rate, oxygen uptake, and leaving it there. See ya.